Hey, good morning, folks. It's Pastor Stephen back again with another No Frills daily devotional. And today's topic is it's not that bad. All right. And if you've been tracking with me, I am taking bites out of a tough topic right now called obedience. And I realize that I am not scoring any popularity points with these videos on obedience because obedience is a tough topic. All right. But it's an important topic. And so I'm going to keep nibbling at it here for a little bit. And so I've been talking about how we've got to stop treating our lives as though there's some sort of balancing act where we've got to do enough God things on one side to try to outweigh the sin things that we allow to enter into our lives. And so, something that I said in a previous video is that partial obedience to God is still 100% disobedience. He doesn't grade on this sliding scale. All right. He's looking for obedience, right? And I talked about that in a video or an episode titled All or Nothing. And what it is it's that we try to balance out our life where we focus on the obedience that we're doing in one area of our life to try to account for disobedience in another area. And that doesn't work, all right? Obedience in one area cannot account for disobedience in another. It's not a balancing act. And I was thinking about how we tend to do this, though, even maybe not necessarily so much in the God things that we do versus the bad things, but a lot of times what we'll do is we'll compare ourselves to someone else, right? Where someone else's disobedience can somehow account for our disobedience. And what I mean is, like, have you ever had this thought, maybe in a conversation with God or maybe a conversation with somebody else, where it's like, well, at least I'm not I don't know, fill in the blank. At least I'm not a murderer, right? At least I'm not stealing cars. At least I'm not cheating on my wife, right? At least I'm not whatever. Okay, where we try to use somebody else's disobedience to be a license for our disobedience. Again, it's not a balancing act. It doesn't work out, and it where we think a lot of times where our sin, kind of on the topic here, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. What I'm doing, it's really not that bad, okay? Or it's not that big of a deal. But the reality is, if you're feeling the need to justify something, chances are it's bad and it's something that you need to deal with. All right. And so I'm going to take you to the text. Let's get into the text here today. I know I'm not winning any points today in the popularity category. All right. So this is Jeremiah chapter 8. And I'm going to read the second half of part 10, or verse 10, I mean, through verse 12. And I want you to hear, because God's having this conversation with the Israelites through the prophet Jeremiah, where they think, they're serving God, but they have this issue with idolatry where they're also serving other gods. But their thought is, well, we're still serving God. Yes, we're making sacrifices to these other gods, but we're serving you too, God. Now this concept of idolatry is interesting for us, because a lot of times when we think of idolatry, we think of these wooden idols that we place up in our lives. And the reality is, idolatry is still an issue today. You might not have stone figures in your living room that you bow down to and worship at night, but you might have something called a TV set in your living room that you bow down and worship to as you're watching hours and hours and hours of something. Okay, right? Remember, I talked about this in one of my fasting videos, how I've been fasting from college football. Why? Because it was something that was consuming my focus and my energy and my time, and anything that's getting your devotion, your focus, your attention, your time, is something that you are worshiping. All right. And so I needed to be careful, because college football was becoming an idol to me, right? But it's not that big of a deal, but it is a deal. And it's something that God wanted to deal with inside my heart. All right. And so this is Jeremiah chapter 8, latter half of verse 10 through verse 12. And God is saying this: from the least to the greatest, okay, all, keyword, all are greedy for gain. Prophets and priests alike, all practice deceit. And I'm going to pause here for just a second because whenever the Bible talks about sin, oftentimes it doesn't mention things like rape, murder, stealing. A lot of times it mentions things like deceit, envy, jealousy, pride. Okay, it's oftentimes the sins that we think aren't that big of a deal, right? They dress the wound of my people as though it were not serious. Okay, and when he's talking about the wound of my people, he's talking about sin, as though it's not that big of a deal. It's though it's not peace, peace. They say when there's no peace, are they ashamed of their loathsome conduct? No, they have no shame at all. They do not even know how to blush. So they will fall among the fallen. They will be brought down when they are punished. And what is God trying to say here? And what's he trying to communicate through Jeremiah and through this text to you and I is that this idea that we got to stop thinking that it's not that big of a deal. We got to stop trying to treat obedience as some sort of balancing act where I'm either balancing out the God things on one side of my life and the sin things on another, or I'm trying to balance out my life compared to somebody else's life. Okay. They aren't meant to be balanced out. God is wanting to speak to you and me about you and me. He's wanting to talk to Stephen about Stephen. He's wanting to talk to you about you. And so I want you to take a look at your life, okay? And maybe see what is something that God is putting his finger on. For me, it was college football, okay? Which didn't seem like it's not that big of a deal. But as I started to assess it, I started to be like, oh man, yeah, I'm like spending like hours on a Sunday afternoon watching college football. And and maybe I shouldn't be spending hours watching college football. Okay. It was something to me that seemed like it was harmless. It wasn't that big of a deal, but it was something that was a deal and something that God wanted to deal with in me. All right. And so remember, God is wanting to interact with you and he's wanting to interact with you about you. And so be open to whatever Holy Spirit is wanting to speak to you today about in your life. And hopefully in some of these videos, I'll kind of give you some direction as where to go next. Hey, you guys have an awesome, awesome day and be blessed.